is the real world fuel economy. This dude just threw stuff out of his car. Just threw like 4 slices of bread out of his car. What are you doing? Welcome to Downshift. My name is Matt, and I have just spent the week with a big and important update to Mazda's lineup. This is their very well-loved CX50, but with a modern interpretation and a new addition to the powertrain. This is the new hybrid, which means it more directly competes with basically everything else in the segment. I just bought a RAV4 hybrid. My wife just got a CR-V hybrid. So I'm gonna walk you through the best and the rest of this car. We'll talk about the things that stood out to us this week, and then make sure you stay subscribed and stay tuned to the channel because we will have head-to-head videos with this versus my RAV4 hybrid, very similar mechanical twins, and this versus my wife's Honda CR-V hybrid. You're not going to want to miss it. So let's get into the best and the rest. And this can sometimes happen with hybrids, but the towing capacity has been reduced for the CX50 hybrid. It maxes out at about 1,500 pounds of towing, which is the least of all the CX50s. Then there's the rear seats, which aren't horrible, but they're not perfect either. We'll start with the good news. There's a panoramic roof, and the door seems to open about 90 degrees, which makes it easier to load kids and stuff into the back. It's a decent size, although it is slightly less than the normal CX50. I've got knee room in front of me depending on where the driver sits, and headroom is actually more of an issue than I thought it was in the non-hybrid. And that could be because the battery pack lives under the seats here, so you don't get slide, you don't get recline. I don't expect slide in something like this, but you don't get any recline from the rear seats here. You don't get window shades, you don't get a third zone of climate control for your rear, although you do get vents and you do get 2 chargers, and you get a single map pocket. And the last kind of nitpick that I'll kind of complain about with the rear seats is Mazda's that kind of mid-tier brand between the mainstream like a Honda and a Toyota, and then a more luxury tier like an Acura or a Lexus. And it would be nice in the kind of midway tier to get some heated rear seats, especially because I think you can get them in some of the rivals. And we also have to talk about tech on the con side of the video because, well, this is just something that I'm getting kind of tired of dinging Mazda for, not because like it's objectively bad, it's just not as competitive as the rivals. You get a head-up display here, that's great, gives me enough information that I would want to see, but you don't have a 360 camera, which I think you do in the turbocharged CX50, and you do in basically all of the rivals bar the CR-V. You also don't have a digital rearview mirror. I'm kind of whatever about that one. It doesn't really matter for me, but I know some people like that. If you've got stuff in the trunk or kids with tall heads back there, then maybe it's obscuring your view. Maybe a digital rearview mirror would be nice. But you also have a semi-digital instrument cluster versus the full digital that you get in like the CX70, CX90. I'm sure when we get a new generation CX50, they'll bring that. But again, a lot of the rivals are bringing a fully digital instrument cluster. You got a 10.25-inch center screen. It's pretty good. You've got wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto. It's touch screen versus not touch screen, depending on whether you're in the native system or in CarPlay, and depending on whether or not you're in drive and over a certain speed, whatever. We've covered it in a bunch of different Mazda videos. It's good enough. But then when we talk about the safety suite here, you have adaptive cruise, you've got blind spot monitoring, cross-track, like all the stuff that you would expect to see, but then it doesn't have lane keep assist. It has kind of like the passive, oh, I'm gonna gently nudge you back into your lane if you drift, but it only works after you're halfway out of the lane. And pretty much every rival, even the CR-V, which we're on, and kind of nitpick against sometimes, that has lane keep assist. So I think this has been decontented so as to not directly compete with the Toyota RAV4 as much. And of course there's a new generation RAV4 coming, but there's just a couple things from a tech perspective missing here on the CX50 that you would get in some of the rivals, just so you know. Then there's just a handful of little nitpicks that we'll cover pretty quickly here. Okay, so as we've covered in the course of this video, this thing's mechanical twin is the Toyota RAV4, but it's been a little bit decontented versus the RAV4. Like for one, you don't have a heated steering wheel like you would on a RAV4. You also, this is a Toyota shifter by the way, I think it's very similar to the one that's in the new GR Corolla, but you don't get a 360 camera, which you can get in a RAV4. You also don't have a fully digital instrument cluster. This is kind of a nitpick for those who like to nitpick, because some people will prefer to have more analog gauges, and you still get a screen in the center giving you most of the information that you'd realistically want. You've also got the whole touchpad versus not touch screen kind of thing, depending on driving conditions and Apple CarPlay conditions, and you have the fairly useless EV mode button that works at very, very light throttle and at very, very low speeds. The car obviously does put itself into EV mode while you're driving automatically, depending on throttle conditions and the driving conditions and the battery state. And the interesting thing is, This is the only designation that shows EV mode. So where in the RAV4 you have this big green logo that comes up and says EV, this is just a small EV logo that goes purple when it is in EV mode and then just darkens to gray when it's not in EV mode. So very, very subtle. And that's probably on purpose because Mazda does not want to call out attention to a transition between gas and electric if they can help it. They want you to focus on fluid driving dynamics. So calling attention to a change in your driving status was probably not what they want to do. But let's say you are in EV mode, the engine is not running, and you're under 20 miles an hour. Now it's typical to have the hybrid howl, or a little sound emitted on the outside of the car. This is regulatory. It's to let pedestrians know that you're around, because obviously at low speeds and on EV mode, it's not making much sound from the car, so it'll let pedestrians know that you're around. Now most cars have a pretty synthetic howl. This one does as well, but it sounds weirdly like brakes grabbing at the rotor or some rubbing in the brakes. It just sounded like something was a little off with the car, and then I realized, oh, it's doing that on purpose. But with all those nitpicks covered, let's talk about all the great things about this CX50 hybrid, because there's plenty. And we'll start under the hood, because now for 2025, we have something that I've been vying for in Mazda's lineup for the last several years, and it's the addition of a hybrid. And this is where the comparisons between this and the Toyota RAV4 come to, let's say, a culmination, because it is a RAV4 engine underneath the hood, despite what the engine cover is suggesting to you. So it's that known quantity, that 2.5 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder. It's the 4th gen hybrid system from Toyota, not the 5th gen that we see in the new Camry. The EPA rates this car for about 38 mpg, which is 10 better than the normal CX50 and 13 better from the turbo. It's supposedly then getting 2 mpg less than the RAV4, but when we took it on our Lakeshore Loop fuel economy test, this car brought back 42.8 average mpg versus the 41.7 in the RAV4. Now caveat, we did this test in the CX50 and it was 25 degrees warmer despite it only being 1 day later. But outside of fuel economy, you're looking at about 219 horsepower, same as the RAV, 202 pound-feet of torque with a little bit of a asterisk next to it due to the hybrid thing, but you can expect performance 0 to 60 in about 7.3 seconds. But again, the thing that really stands out to me is getting almost 43 mpg on our Lakeshore Loop fuel economy test. This is what I've been asking for from the CX50, from the CX5, from Mazda's lineup as a whole, and it's really delivered in the efficiency context here in the new hybrid CX50. And of course, this is a Mazda video, so you can expect we're going to talk about styling on the Pro side of the video. Now the interesting thing is it looks basically identical to a normal CX50. It's a clean, modern look, and it's arguably one of the best looking cars in the class, aside from of course the obnoxious black wheel arch cladding. But anyway, up front you have full LEDs and your typical Mazda CX50 chain link grille, but the hybrid is interestingly 0.3 inches longer than a normal CX50. The profile looks basically identical, and the only thing that would differentiate it is the hybrid badge on the front fender. Again, there's too much wheel cladding for my taste, but you also do get unique wheels for the hybrid. But that's pretty much it. The rest of it is pretty classic CX50. You've got flared shoulders up front, flared hips in back. It looks modern, it looks elegant, it looks pretty aggressive, and it looks pretty good, at least in my opinion. What do you think is the best looking in the class? Leave it down in the comments. And we are going to talk about the trunk on the positive side of the video, and just for context, a lot of what we do here on Downshift with our pro and con videos is comparing the cars to the rest of the field, to its main rivals, but also compared to the other versions of itself. And the CX50 doesn't have the largest trunk in the segment, and when you get the hybrid, you do technically lose 2 cubic feet of space, but it's not like it's impractical. With the rear seats up, you're just under 30 cubic feet. That's where you're going to lose that 2 cubic feet of space versus the normal CX50. You also do have an underfloor storage area with a spare tire under there, so that is great to see. They could have stuck the hybrid battery underneath the trunk and foregone the spare, but I know a lot of you will be happy to hear that the spare is still there. The seats themselves do fold from the trunk, mostly flat, but again, that's something that you're not always getting in the back of a CR-V or a RAV4, the ability to fold the rear seats like that. And with them down, you're looking at about 56 cubic feet of space. So again, it's not the biggest in the class, but there's things that are going on here that I really like. You've got grocery bag hangers, you've got additional pockets, you've got underfloor storage with a spare tire, and you can fold the rear seats from the trunk. A lot of that stuff you can't get in some of the rivals, so it may not be the biggest, but it's one of the more practical trunks in the class. And price isn't something we're used to talking about on the positive side in Mazda videos. Usually they're on the more expensive end of the class when you compare them to things like Subarus and Toyotas and Hondas and Hyundais and Kias, but this CX50 hybrid actually represents a pretty pretty good value. It starts at $34,000, which is cheaper than where the CR-V hybrid starts, but it's more than the RAV4 hybrid and more than the Sportage hybrid from Kia, and about $600 more than the Tucson where that starts. Now, topped out, your CX50 hybrid is going to cost just over $40,000. The Hyundai and Honda and Toyota can be had for more money. So let's say you're looking at a fairly spec'd out CX50, you want a lot of equipment. To get this, with the Mazda looks, the Mazda interior, and this really, really impressive fuel economy, and to get it for less than some of those more mainstream rivals, is a really good value. In terms of how it compares against the NA car and the turbo version of the CX50, it's right kind of there in the middle. So I still think this represents a pretty good value money-wise for what you're getting here. You're getting a lot of car for the money. And then just a couple odds and ends before we grab Paulo and go for a bit of a drive. The first one I want to talk about is the My Drive. These are your drive modes, and they're just kind of funny. So I'll flip it down. There's 3 modes. Now, normally a trail mode, okay, off-road, that kind of makes sense, especially being the CX50 versus the CX5. But then normal, typically called comfort, but also kind of called normal most of the time. This is kind of your catch-all setting, although I do think it is a little bit odd to not have an eco setting for something like the hybrid. But then the last one is called power, not sport mode, but power mode. And then of course the gauge cluster goes from red to clear to tan, depending on what mode you're in. But just kind of funny naming conventions. Plus, of course, you still have the EV mode, which again, it'll automatically do. You see it's purple now and just went to gray, and the engine just turned on. I don't know if you could hear that. But then also in the gauge cluster, one of the things that I like in a CX50 is you have a temperature gauge. This is not something that you have in the Honda CR-V. My wife has a Honda CR-V hybrid, and you don't have a temperature gauge on your dashboard. You can't even get one in the screen to even know how warm the engine is or if it's at its optimal operating temperature. Hey guys, real quick, Matt here. Just wanted to say I hope you've been enjoying the video. If you have, would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it does go a long way in helping us get access to cars sooner and get access to manufacturer engineers so we can get more information on the cars and get you more information so you can make better decisions. So would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe, like, comment, the whole YouTube thing. But with that, let's get back to the video. CX50 hybrid in some of the strangest drive modes: trail, normal, but power, course, but immediately into a right-hander. And this is, I think, actually kind of where the CX50 shines over the RAV4 that I own, RAV4 hybrid, and the CR-V hybrid that my wife owns. And again, stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, because we'll do full dedicated head-to-head videos with this versus the CR-V hybrid and this versus the RAV4 hybrid. But under the skin here, this kind of is a RAV4 hybrid. It's the same engine, it's the same transmission, it's the same kind of all-wheel drive system, but this still drives and feels behind the wheel like a more Mazda profile. It's a little bit more refined, it's a little bit more isolated. It's still kind of a raspy Toyota engine. The Toyota engines kind of have that characteristic rasp or coarseness to them. So there's still some of that, but you can definitely feel that this cabin kind of isolates a little bit more of that out. This car is about 200 pounds heavier than a RAV4 hybrid. You know, that could be a lot of the leathers, but sound deadening and things as well. But what the Mazda does well here compared to either of the cars that me and my wife own is steering. Steering feels probably the best in the class, followed by the Honda, and then I think the RAV4 is maybe somewhere mid-pack or toward the bottom. So initial steering feel, steering weight, and then also chassis balance. So through a corner there, I've felt the most confident behind the wheel of this thing. It doesn't wallow as much as the CR-V. CR-V doesn't, I shouldn't say wallow, but it doesn't have as much roll as the CR-V. And even my RAV4 XSE hybrid doesn't have the same kind of disciplined chassis in a corner, and that's kind of the Mazda effect, right? They've also retuned the suspension on this to account for the added weight of the hybrid versus the gas car. But there's a con side to that coin as well, because as you can kind of see here, maybe you can hear it even, it's pretty stiff. Like, it's pretty stiff behind the wheel here. Even compared to like my RAV4 XSE, which is the sporty tuned suspension or whatever from Toyota, this is an order of magnitude more stiff, to the point where like you get on choppy pavement like this and it's really just kind of busy, it's kind of jittery. There's some vibration that kind of comes into the cabin. It's mostly isolated out, like refinement and volume wise, but just in terms of like ride quality, it's a little bit more busy than really any of the rivals. But of course there's a bit of a trade-off there with some of the sporting pretensions that you're getting behind the wheel. Now again, I think this CX50 is almost exactly what it needs to be. It's weird to me that it's missing a 360 camera. It's weird to me that it's missing a heated steering wheel. I also, if I'm gonna nitpick, would like a little bit more headroom in the rear seat, but overall, aside from that, really, really impressed with this thing. If I were to rank it in the class, I would probably have it in the definitely in the top 3, maybe the top 2. I think this and the CR-V represent probably the best balance. But what I'm most impressed with here is the real world fuel economy. This dude just threw stuff out of his car. Just threw like 4 slices of bread out of his car. What are you doing? There's not like a duck sanctuary or anything around here. There's a bunch of deer around here, but people are strange, man. Yeah, so I think, you know, having spent the last 2 months living with with me and my wife living with our CR-V and the last month with my RAV4 hybrid, I do think this CX50 and the CR-V are my favorites in the class that I've tested so far. I haven't had a go in the Kia Sportage, and I haven't had like enough time in the Hyundai Tucson to really say for sure, but I'm really pretty impressed with this thing. It's not perfect, like I said, those couple things, the cup holder's in kind of the wrong spot, but overall, it's really pretty impressive. But again, if you're more interested in hearing more in-depth and comprehensively how the CX50 hybrid compares with the CR-V hybrid, or how the CX50 hybrid compares with a RAV4 hybrid, make sure you subscribe to the channel because we'll be launching those videos in the next week or 2. So thank you to Mazda for letting us have a go in your brilliant CX50 hybrid. Thank you to you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. And here's a perfect indication. Hello, Mequon Police. This is how it is filming in Wisconsin for like 4 months out of the year. So like a third of the year, it's just gray, wet, and a degree above freezing. Pretty miserable. That's what you gotta do. If you ever wonder why did my favorite car YouTuber move to LA? There's 2 reasons. 1, weather, and 2, they have the biggest press fleet. So anyway, thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.